You know, working with broken things, it teaches you a lot about life. I spend my days at the gallery, meticulously piecing together ceramics that have been shattered for centuries, fragments dug up from ancient sites. And when you do that kind of work, you learn patience, but more importantly, you learn discernment. You learn that some things can be saved, absolutely, but others are too far gone. The structural integrity is just gone, and trying to hold it together is just pretending. You can always see the cracks before they spread too far. I never thought I'd apply that lesson to my own family, but here we are. My name is Daniel, and I've been divorced for about 18 months now. Before that, my marriage to Olivia taught me that same hard lesson. She cheated on me with a guy named Liam from the physical therapy clinic where she worked. And when she left, there wasn't a single apology, no begging, no remorse. She just said she needed to explore her feelings, like that was some kind of noble quest I should respect. Then she just packed her things into Liam's truck one Wednesday afternoon while I stood in my driveway watching her go. My parents, bless their hearts, were there that day too. They watched her load boxes into another man's vehicle, and instead of supporting me, they told me I should fight for her. My mom, Eleanor, said marriage was complicated. My dad, Robert, said I should think about what drove her to that point. When I pointed out she was literally leaving me for someone else, they just looked at me like I was being dramatic. They kept in touch with Olivia after the divorce, of course. Eleanor would casually mention her at family dinners like nothing had happened, like Olivia hadn't walked out on 7 years of marriage without looking back. The settlement gave her half our savings. She left me Buster, our beagle, because Liam was allergic. 6 months later, I found out from a mutual friend that she'd dumped Buster at a shelter. Apparently, Liam had changed his mind about allergy medication. I went and got Buster back, and now he sleeps at the foot of my bed in the small house I bought after the divorce. It's a 1950s place, with hardwood floors that creak in all the right places. On weekends, I refinish furniture in my garage, listening to jazz while I sand down old chairs. And for the first time in years, I had actual peace. Not the kind you fake at family gatherings, or the kind you convince yourself exists because admitting otherwise feels too heavy. No, this was real peace. The kind where you wake up on a Saturday morning, and there's no dread sitting in your chest like a stone. Last week, I was out in that garage, sanding an old wooden stool I'd found at an estate sale. The jazz was playing low, Buster was asleep in his bed in the corner, and then I heard a car door slam outside. I wasn't expecting anyone. I like it that way. I turned off the sander and walked to the front window. And that's when I saw her. Olivia, standing on my porch, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Behind them, pulling into my driveway, was my parents' car. Eleanor got out, holding a casserole dish like she was arriving at a potluck. Robert got out, adjusting his jacket like he was about to give a speech. I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Olivia looked thinner, exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. The little girl, Chloe, was clinging to her leg, looking around like she had no idea where she was or why she was there. I opened the door before they could even knock. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and waited. Eleanor flashed that controlling smile she has, holding up the casserole. "Sweetheart, just hear her out," she said. Olivia finally looked up at me. Liam had left her. She'd made mistakes. She was behind on rent. She'd lost her job. And Chloe, she needed stability. "We were good once," Robert said, stepping forward, putting his hand on my shoulder. "You were a good man, Daniel. You're a reasonable person." Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. "You have a house. You're doing well. You could help." Chloe was staring at me with these big, brown eyes, and I realized she had no idea what was happening. She was just being dragged into the wreckage of adult decisions she didn't make. And that's when it hit me. They didn't come because Olivia wanted forgiveness. They came because they needed a solution. Olivia's life had fallen apart, and instead of helping her themselves, instead of letting her face the consequences of leaving her marriage for another man, they decided to make it my problem. They decided that because I have a house and a stable job, and because I didn't burn my life down chasing feelings, I should absorb the fallout of her choices. Eleanor wasn't holding a casserole, she was holding a bribe. Robert wasn't offering support, he was handing me a script he expected me to follow. Olivia wasn't asking for help, she was asking me to be the backup plan I never agreed to be. I looked at all three of them standing on my porch. I looked at that little girl who deserved so much better than this. And I said one word, no. Eleanor's face went blank. Robert started to say something. Olivia's mouth opened like she was going to argue. I stepped back and closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to the garage. I turned the jazz back on and picked up the sander. Behind me, I could hear them talking. I could hear Eleanor's voice getting louder. I could hear Olivia crying. I could hear Robert knocking harder, but I didn't move. They stood out there for maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer. Then I heard car doors slam, engines start, and the sound of them driving away. I sat down on my workbench. Buster, who had woken up, was staring at me like he was waiting for an explanation. And I realized my hands had stopped shaking. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. This was me finally recognizing that some people will watch you break and then hand you the pieces like it's your responsibility to fix them. I walked inside, opened my laptop, and created a new document. Actions, I titled it. Change locks, install security cameras, block all phone numbers, email lawyer, update emergency contacts, revise will. I sat there looking at that list, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life, making decisions based on what I needed instead of what other people expected from me. Eleanor called that night at 9:30. I was already in bed, reading. Buster was curled up next to me. I watched her name light up my phone 3 times before it went to voicemail. She called again at 10 o'clock. Then Robert called at 10:15. The notifications piled up like snow in a storm. The next morning, I had 6 voicemails and 14 text messages. Eleanor's messages, all the same disappointed tone, saying we needed to talk like adults, saying I was being unreasonable and cruel. Robert's voicemails were shorter, just him saying my name and asking me to call back. But there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard before. Something sharp and angry underneath the surface. I screenshotted every message. I saved every voicemail. I put them all in a folder on my laptop labeled documentation. Then I blocked both their numbers. I blocked Olivia's number. And I went to work like it was just another day. By Thursday, the calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. My Aunt Carol left a message saying I was being cruel, that a little girl needed help, and I was turning my back on family. A number with a different area code called, and a woman I didn't know said she was a friend of Olivia's and I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning a child. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept screenshotting, kept saving, kept documenting every single attempt at contact. At work, my boss, Robert, pulled me aside during lunch. He asked if everything was okay at home. Said I seemed distracted. I told him everything was fine, that I was just dealing with some family boundary issues and that it was handled. He nodded and didn't push. Robert's good like that. He doesn't pry. Friday morning, at 6:35, I was making coffee in my kitchen when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my parents' car. I watched Robert get out and walk up to my porch with this determined stride, watched him try the door handle like he genuinely thought it might be unlocked. Eleanor got out and stood behind him, holding her phone like she was about to call me. I just stood there, drinking my coffee, watching them through the window. Robert knocked loud, the kind of knock that says, "Open this door right now." And I didn't move. He knocked again, called my name with that edge in his voice, even sharper now. Eleanor walked up and pressed her face against the window, trying to see inside. I stayed perfectly still in the kitchen where they couldn't see me. They stood there for 15 minutes, trying different approaches, calling, knocking, checking the side gate. Then they finally gave up and left. I waited until their car disappeared down the street. Then I called a locksmith and scheduled him for that afternoon. I ordered security cameras online, the kind with cloud storage and motion alerts that would record everything. I paid extra for next-day delivery. Monday morning, I had a meeting scheduled with my lawyer, David, the same guy who handled my divorce. He doesn't smile much, but he gets things done efficiently and thoroughly. I brought my laptop. I showed him the documentation folder, everything organized by date and type. He actually whistled when he saw how meticulously I'd kept records. "You don't mess around," he said. I told him I'd learned from the divorce to document everything, to never assume people will be reasonable or honest. He went through the voicemails, the text messages, the screenshots from unknown numbers, and he leaned back in his chair with this look of professional satisfaction. "This is textbook harassment. We can absolutely work with this." I paid him an $800 retainer and left his office feeling like I'd just put on armor, like I finally had someone in my corner who understood what I was dealing with. The security cameras arrived Tuesday, and I installed them myself that evening. Small units mounted under the eaves that weren't obvious unless you were specifically looking for them. Wednesday afternoon, they caught my parents coming back. I was at the hardware store buying sandpaper when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and watched in real time as they walked up to my porch, knocked, waited, looked around, confused why I wasn't answering. Then they left. They had no idea they were being recorded, and I saved every second of that footage to my laptop, added it to the documentation folder with a timestamp and notes. Thursday morning, Robert called me at work. He sounded uncomfortable, apologetic. "Olivia came to the lobby asking for you," he said, and I could hear the unspoken question in his voice, the "what's going on here" that he was too polite to ask directly. I told him if she came back to call the police. I told him I had a lawyer involved and this was officially a harassment situation. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Understood." And that was it. No judgment, no questions. I called Susan in HR after lunch, explained the situation without going into unnecessary details, and she added Olivia to a restricted visitors list. She said if Olivia showed up again, security would escort her out immediately. She said, "This kind of thing happens more than people think," and I felt grateful she didn't make me explain the whole messy history. Friday, I found a card wedged in my front door. My security footage showed Eleanor's car pulling up at 7 that morning, showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, then tucking something into the doorframe before driving away quickly. I didn't open it. I didn't even touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off the door and drove it straight to David's office. He opened it wearing latex gloves, like he was handling evidence in a criminal case. Inside was a handwritten letter from Eleanor talking about legacy and forgiveness and how my grandpa Arthur would be ashamed of the man I'd become. "This is manipulative as hell," David said, shaking his head. "None of this is about his health or family values. It's all about getting you to respond, getting you to break." He added it to our file and told me we were building something solid, something that would hold up in court if we needed it to. The following Tuesday afternoon, I was leaving the gallery when I saw a woman standing by my car in the parking lot. She was older, maybe mid-50s, and she smiled this warm, friendly smile when she saw me approaching. She introduced herself as Eleanor, Olivia's mom, and said she wanted to talk parent to parent about what was best for everyone. "I'm not a parent," I said clearly. I unlocked my car and got in without looking at her. She leaned down toward my window and started saying something about understanding and compassion and how we all make mistakes. I started the engine and looked directly at her. "Don't contact me again," I said. Then I drove away and called David from the car. He said we were building a strong case for restraining orders if we needed to escalate. He said every incident like this just strengthened our position. That night, my friend Sarah texted me. She's Olivia's cousin, but we stayed friendly after the divorce because she's always been straightforward and honest with me. They're planning an intervention, she wrote. They're going to try to ambush you somewhere. Just warning you. I thanked her, told her I appreciated the heads up, and I realized something sitting there reading her message in my quiet house with Buster sleeping on the couch. They weren't done. They were just getting started, and they genuinely believed if they just pushed hard enough, I would eventually break and give them what they wanted. The intervention was supposed to happen that Saturday at my parents' house. Sarah gave me the details Friday night. They'd invited extended family and told everyone I was going through something serious and needed support. They'd even arranged for Olivia and Chloe to be there, probably assuming someone in the family would convince me to show up if they all ganged up together. I didn't go. I stayed home. I spent the morning refinishing the stool in my garage. Around noon, Sarah sent me updates from inside the house. Everyone's here. They're waiting. Your mom keeps checking her phone and looking at the door. She texted. Then 20 minutes later, Olivia's crying. Your dad looks angry. They're telling everyone you've changed and become cold. I read the messages, turned off my phone, and went back to sanding. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Them sitting in a living room, staging an emotional ambush, while I stood in my garage doing exactly what I wanted to do with my Saturday. Sunday morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. The camera footage showed Eleanor's car pulling up at 7 in the morning. Showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, taping something to the door with shaking hands, then driving away quickly. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off and drove it straight to David's office without even opening it. He opened it wearing gloves, like always. Inside was a long letter from Eleanor talking about legacy and forgiveness and family history and how my grandpa Arthur would be ashamed of the man I'd become, how I was destroying the family over pride. This is manipulative as hell, he said, adding it to our growing file. This whole guilt-tripping about your grandfather? It's textbook emotional manipulation. We're filing for restraining orders this week. Monday afternoon, Robert called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, kept adjusting his glasses, not quite making eye contact. Eleanor had called the gallery that morning and told the receptionist I was having a serious mental health crisis, and Robert needed to check on me immediately. I could see he was trying to figure out if it was true, trying to balance concern for an employee with the obvious weirdness of the situation. I sat down. I explained the whole situation calmly and clearly, the divorce, the boundaries I'd set, the lawyer I'd hired, the documentation I had of every violation. Robert listened, nodded, and when I finished, he looked relieved. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Do what you need to do. We'll support you. I called David from my car in the parking lot, told him about the call to my workplace, and heard him typing furiously on his keyboard. That's harassment and potentially defamation. We're filing today, he said. And that same clarity from the first night settled over me again. The temporary restraining orders were granted Wednesday. Judge Albright looked at our documentation, the timeline we built, and signed them without much hesitation or questioning. Thursday morning, a process server delivered them to my parents' house. I wasn't there, but Sarah heard from family members what happened and texted me the details. Your dad answered the door, read the papers, then crumpled them up and threw them on the ground. He's furious. Your mom's in tears. They're calling you unstable and telling everyone you need help. But the important thing was they'd been served. They'd been officially notified. And any contact from this point forward would be a legal violation with real consequences. Friday afternoon, I was at the gallery finishing restoration work on a Ming Dynasty bowl when security called my extension. Your parents are in the lobby. They're saying it's a family emergency and they need to see you right now, the guard said, and I could hear Eleanor's voice in the background getting louder and more frantic. I told him to call the police immediately. I told They had active restraining orders and this was a direct violation, and I stayed at my desk while it all happened. Robert came by 10 minutes later and said they'd been escorted out by police, that they claimed my grandmother had fallen and was in the hospital dying. My grandmother died 6 years ago, I said, and Robert just shook his head in disbelief. The police gave them a warning for trespassing and violating the restraining order. They filed an official incident report, and I emailed a copy to David that night. This helps our case tremendously for permanent orders, he replied. The grocery store incident happened Sunday morning. I was buying coffee and eggs when I turned down the cereal aisle and saw Olivia standing there with Chloe sitting in the shopping cart. She froze when she saw me. Her face went completely pale. I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording video. You see me, you leave, I said clearly and calmly into the camera. I made sure to capture her face, the timestamp, the location, everything David would need. She grabbed the cart and rushed toward the registers without saying a word. I saved the video, labeled it Exhibit C, and sent it to David before I even finished checking out. Tuesday, David called and said Eleanor had filed a countermotion claiming I was having a psychological episode and that the restraining orders were based on my mental instability, not their actual behavior. It's a Hail Mary, he said. She has no medical records, no evidence, absolutely nothing to support this claim. The judge is going to see right through it. The hearing was scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon, and I took the day off work to prepare myself mentally. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Albright was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. When I walked in, I saw my parents sitting on one side with Olivia positioned between them. It looked staged, carefully coordinated. This united front against me, designed to make me look like the unreasonable one. David laid out our case methodically and professionally. He showed the timeline, starting from their first appearance on my porch, the screenshots, the voicemails, the camera footage, the police report from the gallery, the grocery store video, the letter taped to my door. He showed the calls to my workplace, claiming I was mentally unstable, the manufactured emergency about my grandmother who died 6 years ago, the intervention I never agreed to attend. Judge Albright listened carefully, took detailed notes, and when David finished, she looked directly at Eleanor. Do you have medical records supporting your claim that your son is psychologically unstable? Eleanor stammered, said she was just concerned as a mother, said a mother knows when something's wrong with her child. Judge Albright cut her off mid-sentence. Not liking one's family isn't a mental illness, she said firmly, and I watched Robert's face turn bright red. Judge Albright granted permanent restraining orders for 3 years. No direct contact, no indirect contact, no third-party contact allowed. Violations would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. She looked at my parents when she said it, made absolutely sure they understood the seriousness and consequences. Then she dismissed the court. I walked out without looking back. David shook my hand in the hallway and said I'd done everything right. I drove home in complete silence. 3 months later, my life looks exactly like I wanted it to look. I go to work. I restore ceramics that have been broken for centuries. I refinish furniture on weekends. I take Buster camping with my friend Jake when the weather's nice. I updated my emergency contacts at work to remove my parents completely. I revised my will to leave everything to charity, specifically arts education programs and a domestic violence shelter that helps people escape toxic family situations. My parents are strangers now. Olivia is someone I used to know in another life. And the peace I have isn't the fake kind I used to pretend existed at family dinners. It's real and solid, in mine. Sometimes, the healthiest and most courageous thing you can do is recognize when a relationship, even with the people who raised you, has no structural integrity left to save. And walk away to protect your peace. What do you think about all this? Would you have done the same?